Welcome to the very first episode of Ozark Unplugged, something new we're trying here at the Ozark Chamber of Commerce, and the idea is to have a real conversations with leaders, innovators. We're going to be having change makers, people of this community who have shaped the past and shaping the future, plus some culture moments, people of some history, some people who can tell us a little bit about the way it has been in the past, and maybe some legends, which is our first guest here today. It's Mike McCurdo. You formerly of Ozark, Missouri, but since you now have retired to Kimberling City, is that right? Yeah.
Down on Table Rock Lake.
Well, it was funny. So it was over the holiday weekend during Memorial Day weekend, as we were down at the lake, and I remember the weather was just not a great Memorial Day weekend weather. And we had went up to the Little Moss Kitchen there in Kimberling City to grab something to eat, and we wanted to check out that little lake store there. They weren't open yet, so we go wandering through. What's the name of that flea market there?
It's Crystal's.
It's right there on 13 as you're coming into Kimberling City. And I'm walking around the back, and I see this poster, this one right here. You can kind of see it here. It's the Buff Lamb, Keep Buff Lamb for Christian County poster. And I kind of went around it, and I thought, there's a lot of reprints out there. You see them, and I thought, I bet it's just a reprint. They sell reprints at our Christian County Museum down here on the square here in Ozark. And I thought, forget about it. And then I got to thinking about it. The ones down at the square are kind of small. And my Richard, he was going to go back down there, one of our family members, and fish the next week or check on the boat or something. I said, well, just swing in there and see if they still got that poster. And you also had, what were these, Mike? And we're going to get into this in just a second.
Those were those campaign cards that during election, when people were going in to vote, we'd hand those out to the people just as a reminder.
Yeah. Okay, so like business cards, almost kind of like deal. So he goes in there, Richard goes in there, and talks and says, okay, well, she goes, they sold. And said, okay, but here's the gentleman's number, who has them? So Richard gives you a call, Mike McCurdo, and you go, well, yeah, I had them, and tells me that you were the former campaign manager and as well as Reserve Deputy with Buff Lamb for many, many years. Is that correct?
For two terms, yes.
So when did you join the Christian County Sheriff's Department?
Back in the late 70s. Buff came in 1977 for his second term.
Okay.
And so...
Well, let's set this up. Most people, if you're listening to this, you probably know who Buff Lamb is, right? But some people may not. Go, who's this legendary lawman of Christian County? Let's back this story up a little bit. What do you know about Buff's prehistory? I know he was a police marshal, I think, the city marshal in the 1940s to the mid-50s, somewhere right around there for the city of Ozark. Do you remember what year he became the actual sheriff?
I think 65 or somewhere in the mid-60s. And he got a couple of terms then was out, and then came back in 77, I believe it was.
Okay.
You might call him the Donald Trump of Christian County.
Well, why would you call him the Donald Trump of Christian County?
Well, of course, he was in one term,
out
of term, and then back in. And also, we know that Trump does things a little different. Buff was different.
Yeah, you could say that.
Some of the things he probably did, he would probably be facing jail time himself.
What year did you become a reserve deputy with the Sheriff's Department?
78.
And how much did you get paid?
Nothing.
Did you tell me you had to provide your own car, or some of the guys did?
Yeah, actually, all the officers had to use their own vehicles.
Would you just stick a blue light, a red light, blue light up on top, or like an old volunteer firefighter?
Like the regular deputies. We had anywhere from 2 to 4 deputies on the road that were full-time. And they had to provide their own vehicles, using them day and night.
Now, what inspired you to become a reserve deputy with the Sheriff's Department?
Well, when we moved down here, we moved to Ozark with the intention of raising our family here, which we did.
Mm-hmm.
3 children. And we were in Springfield. We weren't sure of the Springfield school systems at that time, and we wanted something smaller and give the kids the best education. Ozark stuck out above other communities around Springfield. And so we chose Ozark. Knew very little about Buff Lamb.
Right.
We had seen articles in the newspaper occasionally about he and Mickey Owen. And so they're working together, we'll say.
Mickey was Greene County.
Yes.
Yeah, Greene County.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so didn't have a lot of knowledge about Buff. But we had built a house down here off of North 10th Avenue and moved into it, and it backed up to the Garrison Spring.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the kids would come off the square at night because people were circling the square on Friday.
I did it back in high school. I'm not going to lie. I graduated from 93, and I cruised the Ozark Square just like everybody else. Yeah.
That's what I do. if they wanted to go relieve themselves, there wasn't any public restrooms on the square.
Green Bridge.
Yeah.
Or P Bridge.
That was the way.
We called it P Bridge. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we were up from P Bridge.
Okay.
The valley there.
Right.
And they were starting to litter that thing pretty heavy. And we had a lady that lived across the street, the circuit clerk's office, Virginia Frisbee. Virginia said, "Why don't you go down and talk to Buff?"
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Sheriff?" And she said, "Yeah, he'll put somebody up there watching it once in a while." So went into the sheriff's office, and Joanne Matthews was his secretary and office manager and right hand.
And of course, this would have been the third floor
Yes.
of the courthouse.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So Buff asked me to come into his office. We talked for about an hour, just visiting and stuff. And at the end of the conversation, he said, "How'd you like to be one of my reserves?" And I thought, well, I hadn't thought about that. He said, "It'll give you an opportunity to take care of some of that down below your house." And I said, "Yeah, that's a good idea." So he set me up to go down to the circuit clerk's office and get...
Wait, you didn't have to go get 900 hours of certification?
Not back then.
So back then, basically, it is here, raise your right hand,
Right.
put your hand on the Bible, and now you are an officer of the law.
Yeah. Scary, isn't it?
Well.
Yeah, it could be. So did that for 2 terms, basically. And he had a good staff at that time. This Joanne Matthews, she was good at what she did. She ran the office, and just a lot went on, and a lot of good things happened at that office because of her.
So really, the only at that point, the only two paid people would have been Buff Lamb and this Joanne Matthews that were on the county.
And also dispatchers.
Oh, dispatchers, yeah. Yeah, that's true.
Danny Clinton was there for years, and Danny was superb. If you were out on patrol by yourself or something, like at 2 o'clock in the morning, Danny would just come on the phone and just check and say, "How are you?
Yeah.
Where are you? How you doing?" And but then he had Orville Danderson as his chief deputy. Orville was paid. And then Joe Tennis, and he lived over at Hymanville, who was a regular deputy, paid. Joe Asher was another one.
Yep, I remember Joe.
Yeah.
Became the police chief at Nixa for a while, I think. Yep.
Yeah, he was over here at the PD here. And Danny Prime. Danny was a young guy, and he was a deputy at that time. He was the first one that I rode with the very first night. And talk about experience, none. But so we got a call, and Buff said, "You're supposed to meet 2 Greene County deputies over at Nixa." Used to be a grocery store right there at the intersection.
Yeah, Solo gas station. Yeah, Thornberries.
And pulled into the parking lot there, and as we were getting out of the car, the deputy from Greene County opened the trunk and pulled out a full automatic gun. And I said, what's going on? And he explained, he said, "There's a guy that has killed 2 people in Springfield and taken an 80-year-old man and beat him up and stuffed him in a closet in Stratford and said he won't be taken alive." And this guy said, "I plan to oblige him." So on the way to the farm that we were going to, where this man supposedly was, I asked Danny, I said, "Danny," I said, "what authority do I have?" And he said, "The same as I do." I said, "Well, what's the difference?" And he said, "I get paid to get shot at, you don't." So a lot of prayer going to that farmhouse.
Yeah.
And I was positioned outside on the north side of the house, and the house is still there today. And beautiful farmhouse. Then we got there. They put me out by a big tree with a shotgun.
Now Buff wasn't there. You just
Buff
went
wasn't
with.
there.
So it was just you and Danny, and then the 2 Greene County guys.
Right, that
Okay.
was it. And but the guy wasn't at the house, which I was very thankful at that. But that was my first.
So no shootout on your first
No
big
shootout.
call, huh?
That was the first.
Wow.
First time out.
Well, we were talking kind of off camera a little bit before we got into this, and you had a lot of stories that you brought in this newspaper article about a big bust. Can you get to it there?
Yeah, that's
But some
Broken Drum Ranch used to be out Highway W. But marijuana back in that time,
Well, yeah. Now they just
Christian County was known for having some of the best marijuana in the country.
really.
Yeah,
Why?
the soil, I guess. I don't
Huh.
know.
Well, I know it grows naturally to at some level in the
Some
Ozarks.
levels,
Yeah.
some
Right.
some form of it does, but this was there'd be times we'd go out to eradicate a field of marijuana, and there might be 12 to 1,500 plants.
Wow.
And it'd take all day to
And just light it up.
inventory, pull it. Didn't light it up.
Yeah, I thought they burnt the fields.
No, brought it to the square in Ozark on flatbed trailers, pickups. A lot of reserve officers at that time had their pickups and
Right.
and had flatbed trailers. It's more like a parade coming to town, and people knew it was coming. Word got out, and brought it up to the square. And be on the south side of the square, there was a huge trash burn there,
Okay.
and piled it on there, and lit it, and
Got everybody in downtown Ozark stoned.
well, the thing is, the jail, like you mentioned earlier, was
Yeah.
on the third floor.
Right.
Well, the prisoners came to their windows. They got a freebie
Oh my goodness.
with that smoke just coming right on up.
Oh, that is hilarious.
Finally, a decision was made, better burn it out in the country.
Oh my.
But
This particular bus, you and Buff have been working this one for several nights, hadn't you?
several guys had been. We'd laid out in the field for like 3 or 4 nights because it was kind of unique.
And this was down south off W Highway.
W Highway,
Okay.
Yeah. And the guy, pretty ingenious, he was taking an old barn and put grow lights in it,
Mhm.
and watering system and fans, and everything was automated.
Huh.
We kept thinking somebody's going to show up and come in
Right.
because it came on every night. Nobody ever showed up.
Must solar timers of some sort, or
Well, not
Well,
solar.
maybe it was
at
a
that time,
powered,
just
yeah.
power, electric
Yeah.
timers. And finally, somebody said, hey, this has to be automated.
right?
So that's probably one of the first in this county. But it was quite a bust on that.
So, all right. So we're here to talk a little bit about Buff Lamb today, kind of telling the stories of what maybe Christian County was like in the late 1970s, early 80s. What are some other? I mean, you read these articles, you hear stories about lawsuits being filed against him at one point for beating up on somebody or running motorcycle gangs out of town. What do you recall some of the more memorable stories that you remember about working with Buff?
Well, I think it was 1980, in the fall of 1980, police officer down at Reed Springs was shot point blank through his car window.
Peril.
Yeah.
I think at the don't they rename the highway after him or something? Down?
No, that's Leniger.
Okay.
Jim Leniger,
Okay.
State trooper that was shot down there. But I happened to be with Buff that night, and he said, we're going over to Nixa. We're going to set up there at 14 and Highway 160. And he said, this guy's going to be driving this truck, the guy that shot the city officer there in Woods. And he said, he'll drive this truck. We're going to pull him over here. And he said, chances are he's going to jump out your side. And he said, shoot to kill. And I'm once again thinking, oh boy, what have I got myself into on this?
Now, at this point, you're carrying a revolver.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not carrying a Glock that's semi-automatic that can rock. Yeah, okay.
357.
Yeah. Which it's got some power.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. But Buff had a unique way of finding out who people were, what they were doing. I don't know who his informants were or what, but he was right on who had shot and killed this guy. And he was later apprehended, but it wasn't through Christian County.
Yeah, he didn't come up through Nixa.
No, not at all.
That's it. He just says it's just shoot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh. Well, I mean, I've talked to. Now, I was just too young to really be impacted by Buff. I was, probably. His last year was 82, 80 is 80, yeah. And so I would have been 6, 7 years old. So I don't have any stories about me and Buff Lamb or anything like that. My dad does. He was a fire chief in Nixa for many years, and he always talked about Buff Lamb and running around Christian County and stuff like that. But you always said there was a softer side to him too, though. Everybody thinks of this rough and tough. Had 2 or 3 wives or something like that, and was always kind of in and out of relationships. But he had a heart too. Tell us about that, Mike.
He of course, he was rough and tough. I mean, when Hell's Angels, before my time of moving to Ozark, Hell's Angels came into town. And I understand that, he took and knocked one of them off his bike, and some of the deputies was down here on the bridge crossing the Finley. And they took and picked up the bike. And you figure a Harley weighs, 800, to 1,000 pounds,
Mm-hmm.
and threw the bike in the river.
You think it's still down there?
I doubt it. Somebody probably pulled it out for a souvenir.
Oh, I bet they did. They threw the bike into the river?
That was the story.
Oh, my.
And Buff told him, said, "This is my town. Get out of here and don't ever come back."
Yeah, I remember reading something one time about a festival that wanted to come to Ozark called the Finley. It was right after Woodstock, so it was in the 19s, and he wasn't having it. He's like, no way they're going to bring something like that to Christian County. They ended up having it in Greene County, and I guess it was a fiasco. So. And
that's where he went up to help Mickey Owen, and I think that's where he ended up getting a lawsuit, he and Mickey.
From that fight?
From that.
Oh, wow. Huh.
So.
Yeah, you said one night you guys were eating pizza at Pizza Hut, and tell that story, Mike. I thought that was interesting.
There was a guy it was rainy, and I think we'd been out on an accident or something, and stopped by Pizza Hut to get a cup of coffee to warm up. And there was a guy sitting over, there was a black guy sitting over against the window on the west side of Pizza Hut. Buff kept looking at him, and it's just he and I and this guy in Pizza Hut at the time. They were ready to close, and Buff looked and he said, "That guy's going to rob this place." And I said, "What makes you think so?" Well, he had his reasons.
Right.
And finally, it just got to the best of him. And he walked over there and sat down in the booth across from him and asked him his name, what he was doing, why he was here, and where he was headed. And guy must have given him a good story. Because Buff said, "Okay," he said, "I'm going to buy your dinner." Took him up to jail. Gave him a place to stay, gave him breakfast the next morning, took him down to the county line and passed him on to, I assume, one of the sheriffs down there.
Taney County.
And they just kind of jumped him right on down to Louisiana, where he was going to visit his mother who was sick.
Really?
But, and Buff said, "Don't ever tell anybody this."
Well, I'm sure, a sheriff of Christian County in the late 1960s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, I'm sure, I know what you're wanting to say, and we just don't want to say it, but I'm sure he had certain opinions about...
Right.
Yeah.
At that time, I mean, he would...
It's a different culture back then.
He would be considered a racist today.
Yeah.
At the top of the list.
Yeah.
But that was just Buff.
Yeah, but still took care of the guy.
Yeah, he took care of the guy. Christmas time, whenever Christmas came around, I could almost bet on a call. There was several years that he'd call and say, "Let's go for a ride."
Mm-hmm.
And he had a Suburban. He always had a Suburban around. And the back of the Suburban was toys wrapped up, groceries, turkeys, all the trimmings for Christmas. And throughout the year, he had watched people and knew who needed help. And he would take that, and he had collected money not only out of his own pocket, but he knew business people in Christian County that would contribute to something like that. No recognition was wanted, and he just made that Christmas for people very special.
Now, how did you get roped into being his campaign manager? So you go from complaining about kids peeing off the bridge or Garrison Springs or whatever, to a reserve deputy to being his campaign manager. How did that happen that first?
We just had a good relationship, and I was in PR.
Okay.
On a full-time job, and so.
Where was your real job back then?
It was with a television ministry out of Springfield.
Okay.
And we did television programs. We were on about 250 stations across the country.
Okay.
And did all of our production in Hollywood.
It's funny how us PR guys, marketing guys who kind of know how to do that stuff, we get roped into doing a lot of things like that, don't we? Yeah, it's like, well, he can do some graphics or he can make it, So
it's kind of like this poster here. I didn't care for the picture, but Buff liked it.
That one there?
That hat was way too small. But that face was Buff.
Yep.
And the only thing it doesn't show is his flashlight.
Oh, the big, the big D, seven cell. Yeah.
But so I just went after it and had a lot of good help in the campaign, and people were really anxious to give, not only their time, but their money.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd call and he said, "You need to go so-and-so, he's got a check for us." And he didn't want any responsibility with the money.
Today a candidate, if somebody was going to run against Sheriff Cole and he had to put a campaign together, it's a $30,000+ campaign easily to run for the entire county. What did a campaign cost back then? A couple grand or
maybe?
Yeah.
And the printing company here in town, down by what used to be Paul Shoeball Chevrolet down on the river, they did a lot of it gratis.
Yeah, because you're probably not buying radio and TV.
Right.
You know, right? We're not
No.
today's market. You're going to be buying social media ads. You're going to be buying YouTube ads. You're going to be making videos. All the above. You're just literally putting posters and signs up.
Yeah, we had a lot of people out putting signs on the telephone poles, on trees, on their houses. Where
Right.
he had a good following.
Who do you, in that first campaign that I know it was Dwight McNeil. That was the second one, but who was the first one?
Mayberry was Joe Mayberry.
I guess I don't know who that was. Yeah.
But Buff always carried.
Yeah.
Now, his last campaign, of course, Dwight was one of his deputies.
Mm-hmm.
And Dwight ran a good campaign. He was young. He was enthusiastic. He got out and hustled. And
I just remember his bright green signs.
yeah,
They were bright green, shamrock green. I just remember those, and that was me being 6, 7, 8 years old, you know. But I remember the bright green signs.
Yeah.
Interesting, huh? That's funny. Yeah.
so he ran a good race and he beat Buff. And I think Buff probably
Yeah, but
didn't work it as hard.
if I read correctly, or maybe you told me, Buff was kind of already didn't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
And then what I read in preparation for today was that maybe there's a story that his wife or girlfriend at the time wanted him to rerun. That's the story that I read online. When you think that's what it was?
Story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who knows?
He was pretty confidential in his opinion. I mean, he kept it to himself.
Well, by the 1980s, things are changing a little bit. You're kind of coming out of that 60s, 70s, 80s is getting into be that, the 80s generation, right? The next generation is what they used to call that, the Gen X's. And so I think times might have just been changing. Maybe the county was looking for somebody new. But, still though, I still know that a lot of people. Patty, she works here in the office. She told a story that her and a girlfriend were 16 years old. And she's, I hope she don't mind that I'm telling this story. She's told it so many times now that we've talked about it. But 16 years old, and they were on the square, right? Back was what you do, run the square. And they decided to follow some boys down to W Highway, all the way down to Bull Creek, and got down there. And, of course, here comes Buff Lamb. And Patty says that he looked over and goes, Young miss, you need to go home right now, and you need to tell your daddy what you did. And I'm going to stop by his house tomorrow and check on it to make sure that you did. Because he knew her dad. Yeah. So I thought that was a neat story. Of course, she got home and scared to death, and I guess she finally told her dad the story, and I'm not sure what happened after that. But anyway, so he always had that fear. Do you ever remember some of those stories or anything like that?
He had a policy that was probably 90% of the time he went with that policy. If it was the kid's first time, he gave him a lot of grace. And the same as she had.
Right.
Go home, tell your folks, don't let me see you out again. If they had, a six-pack, he'd say, you got 30 seconds to empty those right here. And he would, and
right.
you'd see him trying to get the lids off and everything else barehanded. But on the square, that was his square too. And on the square, he kept it pretty calm. And a lot of kids would come out of Springfield and other areas and maybe test the waters to see how rough he really was. And that was a mistake. But I always said, if Buff got overpowered on the square, 90% of the kids in those cars would come out to his aid.
To back the sheriff. Yeah.
Because he was fair with them.
Yeah.
Unless they crossed that line. And if they crossed the line, then it was, his game.
Yeah. Interesting. We're talking about the legendary Buff Lamb here on the Ozarks Unplugged podcast. Our first one guest here is Mike McCurdo with us today, and I'm Chris Russell with the Chamber. Got our names up there. First time doing it, kind of working through the glitches, but good content here. We'd love to talk about the history a little bit. We're going to also use this podcast to talk about the future of Ozark as well, but our roots in this county, it's kind of funny, is this coming Friday night, I'm going to be doing the MC, and there's a night at the museum. I think you said you were at the museum today. We're doing a fundraiser for them coming up this coming Friday night, and there's a big Buff Lamb area down there. Have you noticed that? And the author who wrote that book, I forget the name of it. It's his last name is Greer, but it's about Buff Lamb. He's going to be there that night, and I'm anxious to tell him about our conversation today and kind of see his opinion on that. But it is a legend, and people like that shaped a lot of that area back, that timeline back then was county was beginning to grow a little. We didn't hit those growth spurts until the late 80s and 90s is when
Right.
Nixa, Ozark Christian County really began to see some acceleration, and of course then everything just got bigger after that. So this was kind of the good old days if you think about it.
Yeah, it was.
I mean, we didn't have divided highways. We had single 2-lane highways everywhere. We didn't have. You talked about being at the square or the over at 14 and 160 in 1980. Well, that just would have been a crossroads,
Yeah.
right? It wasn't. It was
Got
just
a
a.
dairy farm on one side,
Yeah.
grocery store on the other.
It was just a different time, and the county was still kind of growing up. And for you to be a part of that and shape that, and I kind of feel fortunate too because my dad was a fire chief in Nixa from 1976 till he retired in '03 or '02, and he too became. It was in the '80s though, so you were talking about you only had to have maybe 1 or 2 officers on a night. And they'd get on these scenes and out in the middle of the county and waiting on Christian County to get there because it would have been you then, but it would have been one of the other deputies. They may be coming from Billings or maybe coming from Chadwick or Sparta, and situations would arise that needed law enforcement. So my dad actually became a reserve deputy with the Christian County Sheriff's Department back in the mid-'80s through the '90s. And he would go out on patrol and tell these stories. He got involved with one of the first SWAT teams, too, that the Christian County Sheriff's Department had. But I think that's funny, too. You think about today's police officers, all what they wear. You guys were out there in a badge and a shirt and a pair of pants and a gun and a handcuff and maybe a baton. That was it, right? Maybe. And you had to buy all that yourself, didn't you? Yeah.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
But it was rewarding at times, and there was times that and I have to say that Missouri Highway Patrol was a big factor in Christian County in helping out too, because for a while they were out of Christian County.
What do you mean?
There was a difference between not Buff, but a previous sheriff, where, the way I understood it, the state just kind of backed out. They came here only in emergency.
Oh, you mean, okay, they weren't headquartered.
Yeah.
They were told not to come into Christian County.
In so many words.
Wow.
But Buff had a good relationship with the state. Matter of fact, the first highway patrolman to move into Christian County was Paul Etheridge. And Paul and I are good friends today. But he took an old house, which used to be a hospital, up off of the square by the elementary school.
Okay, yeah.
And he and his wife
I know right where it's at.
redid that house.
Huh.
And but he was the first officer for the state to move into Christian County.
Now, if you guys back then, I mean, you also had Ozark PD you could call, and if you're over and you can get Nixa, would have an officer on too. But that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. You're over in Clever. Clever probably didn't have a full-time fire or a policeman back then. I don't
There
think.
was times you could be down at Chadwick,
Mm-hmm.
and there would be a call in Billings. Now Billings had a town marshal,
Mm-hmm.
and most little towns did. Clever did too.
That's one guy.
Yeah, just one guy.
One guy, and you could have had any kind of situation come up.
And back then, I mean, look at it today. Look at L.A.
Oh.
Today, officers were respected.
Yeah.
And I don't care if you were, a full-time or a part-time. Yes, sir. No, sir. Thank you, sir. Whatever. And today we don't see that.
You just don't. It's sad.
It'd be very tough to hold a job like that today, and I admire our people.
Right.
We've got Christian County. I think is very fortunate right now. Brad Cole is doing a good job.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked earlier about having to provide your own cars and your own leather, your own service weapon and such. I marvel every time I go downtown and see all the cars and see the building and see the officers out that are dressed. They look very professional.
Well, and they do a lot of public. We've got an event coming up, Back to School Bash, where we're going to be helping this Ozark schools do some fundraising for some of the students, and they're going to be right there with us. Yeah. They're going to be engaging and helping, and Sheriff Cole and his team do a fantastic job.
He's done a good job.
Yep.
And I hope he serves as long as he wants to. But we've got Doug Rader in Stone County.
Mm-hmm.
And we got Brad over at Taney County. And, we've got good law enforcement in southern Missouri.
We do.
And they all work together.
And hope they never have to.
Yeah.
I see that stuff on TV, and I'm just like, we are fortunate here. I mean, not to say that we can't have something happen. I mean, in any situation, same thing with the fire service, right? I mean, those guys could be getting a call right now that is as dangerous as anything any big city or firefighter or a policeman would ever want to encounter. I mean, it can happen, and heaven forbid. I don't even think about mass shootings, I don't want to think about those kind of events, but I know that our teams do work very, very well. But, I think is another reason why I have such respect for the old ways of doing things because, drunk is drunk. I mean, and if you get some belligerent drunk out there that's got a pistol in his hand, you're as much danger all by yourself out in the middle of Chadwick as you are in downtown Ozark. I mean, it was different, though. You do have more backup quicker here. And these guys that we've had some shootouts on the square even in the last, 5 to 10 years. We've had a couple of incidences over there, yeah. So things do happen. But back then, it was just a little bit different where everybody did respect the law, And yes, officer, I messed up. And I'd say 90% of people in our county are still that way. I think we have a few oddball ducks here and there. They're probably already in the local prison over there, but we do, but it was just different back then. It was a different time. Okay, any funny stories? I mean, we told about the stuff where he helped a guy out. That tugged at my heart a little bit. We talked about him throwing the motorcycle over the river. That's kind of funny. But anything that was just funny about Buff Lamb that comes to your mind?
Well, you never wanted to get on his bad side.
Okay.
And every winter, out off of Fremont Road, before the new Fremont Road came into existence, there was a lot of hills and curves run beside the golf course there in the housing development. And every winter, cars would get stuck over there. Okay. And one night there was an accident, and it involved several cars. And several of us were out there, and Buff was out there, and they just loaded a car onto a wrecker, and I heard this car pickup coming, and it ran into the back of the wrecker, and Buff was standing right there. And if you were a long hair in the 60s, Buff didn't like long hair.
I heard a story that he even shaved a guy one time. You think that was true?
I don't know.
Okay. He didn't like long hair, so this guy's got long hair.
Yeah. And Buff walked up to him, the guy, you could smell alcohol. And Buff looked in the back seat of the truck. It had a little jump seat back there, and there was a young girl, 8 or 9 years old, the guy's daughter,
right,
and another drunk on the other side. Without too much being said, he grabbed a hold of the guy's hair and brought him through the window and said, "You're going to jail."
Just like that.
Just like that.
Just yanked him right out of there. Well, sure, he was drunk, had a kid in the back. It's endangering the welfare of a child. I mean, there's all kinds of charges there.
But it was kind of funny. To see that happen.
You saw it live.
I saw it live.
You saw him just rip him right out of there.
And I asked Buff, I said, "Do you want me to take him downtown?" He said, "Better."
Get him out of here right now.
Yeah.
Well, Mike, I appreciate you coming in today. It's fun to kind of relive some of the history of Christian County. We have so much of it, and I know you were down at the museum a while ago. Did you see that new Ball Knobbers painting? They just hung it today, and it's just absolutely today is recording day is on Wednesday, and it's when you turn that corner and it's just right there. Now, that shows the history of bad guys in Christian County. I mean, here we are hanging ball numbers on the county square. But we do have a lot of history, a lot of Civil War history, too, that people don't know about that I'm hoping to explore a little bit on the podcast at some point because I have a passion for Civil War history and those sort of things. But also we're going to be visiting with area business leaders we want to bring in and find out their stories. So that's kind of what this whole podcast is all about, to bring it back. But we've been visiting with Mike McCurdo, who is a longtime resident, now likes to go bass fishing. Oh, dude, we went down last weekend. I had to swim to the dock.
We're having to do ours is as close in as we can get.
We got trees. You just can't. And I think we're out of line too. I mean, has it gone down at all? I haven't checked the lake levels. It was 9:28 Sunday.
It should be down a foot. They had, last I saw, they had 4 gates open.
Yeah, it was crazy. Lots of rain coming in. So you might see me down at Table Rock Lake sometime bass fishing. And a longtime friend of Christian County is your son-in-law, former school board president of Nixa Schools, Scott McDonald. Yeah. I was shocked when I found that. Then I think I'm friends with your daughter on Facebook, and she uses her maiden name in the middle of it. And so it all made sense to me now. When you told me that the other day, I'm like, okay, that's right. And put it all together. So lots of ties to Christian County.
They're in Alabama now, and they bleed red.
Go Tide, roll Tide. All right, well, thanks for listening to the Ozarks Unplugged podcast from the Ozark Chamber, and we hope to be bringing these to you at least once a week. Thanks for coming in today, Mike.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it, buddy.